It's the Full Court Press with Eric Frandsen and Jason Walker.
Welcome back to the to the show that we're doing right now.
Following the local teams, breaking down the biggest games with in-depth analysis and team interview. Join the show by calling into 435-752-1069 or text 435-339-0321. It's the Full Court Press.
Rose, answer. Yes! Caught! Touchdown! They did it!
Hello. Welcome on in. It's Eric Frandsen and Jason Walker. Special podcast edition here of the Full Court Press. We are being preempted on a Thursday afternoon by it's the Skyview girls basketball team. They're still alive in the 4A girls basketball tournament. And so their game taking place at the time when we would normally be on the air for the Full Court Press. So we decided there's still too much going on to just not have anything. So Jason and I fired up the microphones, decided we'll do a special pod put it on our podcast feed to talk about what happened Wednesday night in the Spectrum, and historic beatdown for the Utah State Aggies over the San Jose Spartans, and also the Utah State football schedule released today. So a lot of things to touch on and go over. And let's start off with what happened last night in Mountain West Conference play, because it wasn't just the Aggies with something of note. There was another big conference game that has some consequences. But certainly the Aggie one is what we want to focus on first. Utah State beating San Jose 105-57. Just a total beatdown. A game that a lot of Aggie fans, me included, have been kind of hoping to see for quite some time. Like, we've known this team can create separation and blow out opponents, but we haven't seen anything like this for quite some time. And I'm not just 48-point blowouts, but just a start to finish in control of the game. We've seen some games where the Aggies had a good first half, but the really good first half, and then the second half it was good enough, but opposing teams made a little bit of a run and got it into single digits. But that did not happen last night. Utah State took control, still had some within striking distance a little bit. Then the Aggies stretched it at halftime and even stretched it further into the second half. Just a great performance all around for Utah State.
Yeah, there's nothing really to be critical about this game. The only thing you're critical of is whether or not, the Aggies only shot 57%, and you could criticize everyone to say they should get 100. Like, the only way you can criticize this is if you're being overly nitpicky, because you cannot complain about 57% shooting overall. You cannot complain about 52% from three, and you can barely complain about 76% at the free throw line. You can't complain about 41 rebounds, 21 assists, only 6 turnovers. You get 4 blocks. You have 11 steals. Just everything about this game, from beginning to end, was about as perfect as you could get it. And especially about as perfect as you're going to get in conference play. As we were digging around through the stats after the game, figuring out, is this the biggest win the Aggies have ever had in conference play? First I figured it was the biggest since they joined the Mountain West. And then later it's like, this is the worst they've beaten any conference opponent ever. And this isn't even the worst team they've faced in conference play. Like some of the earlier ones where they dog-walked an opponent, it was still San Jose State. I think the previous top 2, and now it's like the top 3, are like all San Jose State games. But those were ones where San Jose State was just a bad team, like just awful, like 1 or sometimes even 0 wins in conference play, San Jose State. This is a team that beat New Mexico. This is a team that was close against the Aggies just a few weeks ago. This is a good team. Dang near beat San Diego State twice. So this is a good team, and Utah State just decided, look, we're just better than you. Go home now, please.
Yeah. Yes, San Jose was missing one of their main guys. He didn't turn out to be available. But Uduje, he really is their main guy. played 29 minutes, but he only managed 4 points. And the Utah State defense just really didn't let anybody get going very well. And San Jose tried the same approach as they did the last time, chucking up a lot of 3-point shots, but they weren't making them nearly at the same level. 9 of 31 from 3. And just the Utah State defensive intensity was so much better. Just the atmosphere at home obviously helps. But that was a juiced up team and a juiced up crowd that has been waiting for something like this for quite some time.
Yeah, and we talked about it before the game, like the weaknesses that San Jose State has, where they're a team that can be a little overly reliant on jump shots. They struggle to, one, defend in the paint, and the Aggies got 50 points in the paint, but they struggle to finish in the paint at times, or at least have some balance between being able to hit from the outside and parlay that into maybe a few shots inside. They were actually able to do that sort of against the Aggies in that first. That's where they got the 78 points. Of course, they hit 14 3-pointers, which is a big help for them. But in this one, the Aggies forced them to shoot poorly at the rim. San Jose State was barely over 50% on shots right next to the basket. And then, as you mentioned, they shoot 28% from 3. One of their key spark plug guys for their offense, Latrell Davis. I know he doesn't start, but this is a guy who I think over the last month and a half, it was somewhere around the last 8 or 9 games, he'd been averaging like 17 points per game on like 50, 80 shooting, where he's shooting 50% overall from the field, 50+% from 3, and shooting pretty well on free throws as well, though he doesn't take a ton of free throws. And he goes 1 of 9. And keep in mind, the last game where San Jose had 78 points, Latrell Davis had, I think it was 20. It was either 20 or 22. Donovan Yap also had 20 or 22 in that game. So Latrell Davis is a huge spark plug guy. He goes out there and he just gets those points off the bench. When when some of their key guys come off, like when Will McClendon would come off, I know he missed this game, but normally when he's in there, or when Josh Duje or Donovan Yap, those are kind of their main offensive guys in their starting lineup. When those guys come off, Latrell Davis comes in and is sometimes an even bigger offensive producer for the Spartans. And he was just completely absent on offense, made 1 field goal the entire night. And that was absolutely massive. And, forcing him into tougher shots, forcing the entire team into tougher shots, contested 3-point jumpers, contested, shots like in the mid-range, contested shots at the rim. Everything San Jose State did was challenged hard by the Aggies. And sure, they could have shot better, but the Aggies did everything in their power to force San Jose State to make tough shots. And on this occasion, San Jose State just didn't make those tough shots. And so the Aggies just ran them out of the building on defense and also on offense. on
both sides. And I really liked how Utah State just did not give them any oxygen. They did not give them any breathing room. They were quick on their rotations, quick to chase the ball, get there as the ball arrives, just get hand in the face, tough shots. Nothing was easy for San Jose State all night. And sometimes we have seen this Aggie team has been prone on a couple different occasions where they'll play well and they'll dig in and they'll get focused and they'll go on these runs and they'll create separation. And then they kind of back off a little bit. They're not quite as intense. And they open the door for teams to creep back into it. And last night they didn't do that. They didn't allow that to happen. And I think that Coach Calhoun sent a strong message to his team. Look, we've got to finish this start to finish. We need to play a full 40 minutes here and really put this as a complete game, because we've had these games where we have great first halves, but we kind of fade in the second. We're not going to let that happen tonight. And they score 47 in the first half, 58 in the second. So offensively, they just kept the pedal to the metal. And then defensively, only allowing 24 in the first half. They allowed a little bit more in the second, but not by much. Only 33 in the second half. Just a great defensive performance by Utah State.
When 33 points in the second half is a drastic increase from what you allowed in the first half, you're having a good game.
And you're doing it right.
Because 33 in each half goes for 66, and it's that's usually a pretty good defensive game for you. And so, and even some of that, like San Jose in the last couple of minutes, they chucked up a few 3-pointers, made a couple. Like with under 2 minutes left, they chucked up a few threes, got them to go. And like if they hadn't have done that, the Aggies would have won by 50. Like if they just hadn't have made these couple of random 3-pointers, and that helped them from like a sub 50 point game. Some of those late garbage time 3-pointers. So yeah, and I really like what you're pointing out with the second half, where the second half was better than the first half, and the first half was already stupendously good, where they had a 23-point lead at halftime, and then they outdid themselves because they've had these leads as we've gone over and over and over again on this show. You bring up the Fresno State game, the most recent one, or really both of them actually. Yeah. And then the Colorado State game. And you could even kind of throw in the New Mexico games where they had a 10-point lead in the second half for the most recent one. I can't remember. Their lead was 7 or 8 points or something like that at home in the second half in the Spectrum. They lost both of those games, allowed their opponents within spitting distance against the Rams and the Bulldogs and even against San Jose State to a degree. And so, yeah, that they'd have these leads and then they'd give them up. And in this case, as you pointed out, they just did not do that. They buckled down. Like, even, when the game was like, so look at this. There's 13 minutes left in the second half. Utah State's up by 29. This is about the time where you could say, hey, they might take the pedal off the gas, start, settling down a little bit. The kind of stuff that had happened in some of these other games. And at worst, the game ends in like an 8-point victory. Because the Aggies pretty much had this one wrapped up in the first, getting that lead from 23 all the way to 31. But yeah, with 29 minutes left, with 13 minutes left in the game, Utah State was up by 29. Over the next 4 minutes, the Aggies went on an 18-0 run.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Like, this is the time where you can fold up the tent, the fans start chanting, warm up the bus, all that kind of stuff. Like, you've won the game. And the Aggies were like, we're not done. And they put together the most dominant stretch of the game. In part of the game that, frankly, didn't matter as far as the result. The Aggies were going to win. That had already been determined by the first 27 minutes of the game. But the Aggies decided, we're not done with you yet. We're putting you through hell. And they did just that. We're in 18-0 run, which, heck, from like the 16-minute mark to the 9-minute mark, it was like a 27-3 run, something to that effect, if I'm doing the quick math. Because he went on 4-0, 5-0, and 18-0 runs, although they were interrupted by one free throw and one layup.
Yeah.
So 27 points over 6-minute span, and San Jose got 3.
Well, and really that kind of started the back end of the first half too, because they hit 22. San Jose does at about 7.5 minutes to go. They only score 2 more points the rest of the half, the rest of the first half.
Yeah. So 13-2 run to end the half.
Yeah. So that just those runs that Utah State was able to put together, just clamping down on defense, continuing to go full throttle on offense. I loved that. Everybody who got in the game for Utah State scored, and the starters didn't have to go very hard in the second half. Because there was a threat of a comeback that was happening. Oh, I got to put our starters back in there and quell this thing. They didn't really need to do that. And so other guys got opportunities to get in there, play some meaningful minutes. It was great to see Tucker Anderson kind of reemerge as somebody who can help the team offensively and defensively, because he's had some issues with his health a little bit. But I'd love to see what was going on with Utah State and their bench, and just their depth was on full display, and they didn't disappoint.
Yeah, I like that you bring up Tucker Anderson. Something I pointed out, I didn't express this very well in the postgame because I kind of asked Tucker about this, but something I pointed out on social media is that, so Tucker Anderson, he scored in double figures 3 times in the Spectrum this season. The Aggies have won by an average of 55.7 points when he scores double digits in the Spectrum. So yeah, get Tucker to that
Get
that
Tucker
10-point
into double
mark,
figures,
and you'll
Aggies will be fine.
He'll probably win because I think he did against Alcorn State and Charlotte. I think were the other two. That or Westminster, because those are the games that the Aggies got the triple digit scoring and then won by like 30 or 40. They won by 119 points in the other two, and then plus 48 for this one. So this wasn't even their best game with Tucker scoring double digits at home.
No, but good to see him. I mean, he was 3 for 6 from three, so it's always good to see him hitting threes at home because he's got a little bit of a habit of struggling at three.
Yeah.
In the spectrum, that is. But generally speaking, Utah State as a team shot very well from three, 52% from the 3-point line. And then also getting back to a little better performance at the free throw line for a lot of guys. Mason was perfect at the line. Aubin was perfect. I mean, Dexter didn't attempt a free throw, but all of your starting, besides him, the other 4 guys in the starting lineup were all perfect at the free throw line.
Yeah, it's nice to see a couple of guys that were struggling, like Mason and Aubin are 2 guys that struggle at the free throw line. Well, heck, even Carson, he went 2 for 2. It was weird that Isaac Johnson was the one who actually struggles because he's actually pretty solid at the line typically, but he has the worst game and was 1 for 4. So limited impact there, and then a couple of other misses here and there from some of the other guys. So yeah, great performance in basically every facet of shooting. Borderline season best from 3. I don't think it is their season best 3-point percentage, but it's close. And then one of their better overall field goal percentages. Again, just efficiency galore out of basically everybody. And as we mentioned, everyone getting at least 1 field goal in the game.
Well, and 10 of the 12 players who saw the court grabbed a rebound. So everybody was active doing a lot of different things for Utah State. This was a really good shot in the arm game for this team. Something that they need as a rebound to what happened on Sunday in Albuquerque.
Yeah. And Coach Calhoun talked about how that probably impacted them, where they may have been playing angry and playing with a little more determination. We've seen the Aggies play well after losses. After they lost to UC San Diego, they had was probably their best win of the season at this point, St. Mary's. Mm-hmm. They beat them and pretty much manhandled them the entire game. After they lost to UNLV, they just stapled Nevada to the wall. And then now they lost to New Mexico. Or after they lost to Mexico, I guess the Wyoming game was close, so this analogy doesn't work perfectly. But after 3 out of the 4 losses, they just plastered their next opponent, or at least had comparable levels of greatness. Because obviously St. Mary's 75-68 isn't a super impressive scoreline, but context matters there. And then Nevada 90-69, San Jose, it's your largest margin of victory in a conference game ever. They've played pretty well after losses.
Yeah. Pretty well.
Yeah, pretty well.
They've done pretty well. This was I think an important game for USU to exercise their whatever demons may have been around for that game, that loss in Albuquerque, but also to inject some confidence in some of the rest of the squad ahead of another really important game coming up this weekend. There aren't very many games left on USU's schedule, but they still have to play 3 of the top 5 teams in the conference to finish this thing out. So it's not like they're going to cakewalk through the back end of their conference schedule here. This was a nice one to feel good and make shots and regain some confidence for some guys. But it's not going to get much easier to close this thing out.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky. Because, you get San Diego State at home. That's kind of on the easier side of your next 4 games, because you got to go to Boise State, who just beat New Mexico at home, so that's definitely going to be a tough one for the Aggies. And then you got at Colorado State, and I know the Aggies handled the Rams pretty well at home, but as we detailed during our preview of that, Colorado State is a very different team at home. They play very well at home in basically every way. They play way better on offense. They play way better on defense. And so they're just a different team when they're on their home court. So that's going to be a challenge for the Aggies. I think all 4 of their next games are highly winnable. but your next 3 are also highly losable. Basically, the one game that you might call guaranteed is Air Force.
Yeah, the last one on March 8th.
That's your season finale. That's Ken Palm has the Aggies at a 98% chance to win, and that might be undershooting it a little bit.
Yeah, it was the Aggies weren't the only team in action last night. It was New Mexico at Boise, a future opponent. Utah State's going to have to travel to Boise here in a week from last night on February 26th. They'll be in Boise, and the Broncos hosted New Mexico and put it to the Lobos, beat them 86-78. And kind of like what we were talking about, Utah State got better in the second half. They extended their lead and did better. Boise State did something similar. Like, it was a close game at half, but then they extended that even further in the second half and walked away with the win, 86-78. And Degenhart was a huge part of that with 32 points for the Broncos.
Yeah, New Mexico finally found someone where they kind of had the matchup issue, where they've been used to having just, Nelly Joseph and Donovan Dent just basically do whatever they want, and nobody can really stop them. And if somebody is slowing them down, True Washington comes in and has a big game. But suddenly they got put on the back foot as Tyson Degenhart, but then there was kind of the surprise. Pearson Carmichael comes in, scores 21 points, hits 4 3-pointers there. And you get good supplemental performance from Alvaro Cardenas, who gets a double-double. So they did what they needed to do, and they've done what a lot of other teams have struggled, as you mentioned, like being better in the second half, not slowing down, and just as importantly, don't let New Mexico speed up. New Mexico gets a very solid 39 in the first half, but they get 39 in the second half, while Boise State goes over 40 in both halves. So maybe it wasn't the most stellar defensive performance from the Broncos, but they had the offense to match and did enough on defense. They didn't commit a bajillion fouls, which I guess Boise State just, the foul margin was against New Mexico in this one.
Yeah, 15 fouls for the Broncos, 24 for the Lobos.
Yeah, so I guess that can have an impact there. But yeah, just not allowing New Mexico to get up to speed in the second half, as I think one of the texters when we were previewing New Mexico pointing out, how well the Lobos had been in the second half of a lot of the recent games. And both the Utah State games were an example of that for New Mexico. Their game against, was it San Jose? It was a team they almost lost to.
New Mexico?
Yeah, New Mexico. So they had another game against one of the lower opponents.
I'm pulling up their schedule right now. They had...
so it was Wyoming right before Utah State. It was Wyoming where they kind of accelerated in the second half. And
yeah, it was only a 4-point game.
Yeah, so they'd been really good at jumping out in the second half and just blitzing their opponents, but Boise State didn't allow that to happen. And we'll see if San Diego State's able to do the same thing. And if the Aggies meet the Lobos for a third time, you can hope that they can learn from their mistakes in the first 2 matchups and maybe get the last laugh.
So what that has done for the standings here, when you look at what's going on in the Mountain West, this was... the Lobos are still on top. They still have a cushion, and suddenly I had it, now it's not loading. Anyway, the Aggies would need New Mexico to lose several more games, and that's not very likely. When you just consider what's still left to be played, and to consider that New Mexico has a tiebreaker since they beat the Aggies twice.
If you're looking for a regular season conference championship, New Mexico has to lose one more game and the Aggies have to win out. That's kind of your minimum. There's more combinations that involve the Aggies maybe losing one, but New Mexico losing more than one. But if you want a regular season conference championship, New Mexico loses one and the Aggies win out.
New Mexico, they'd be tied in record.
Yeah, but doesn't matter. Tiebreakers don't matter for regular season conference champion.
I guess that's true.
If you're talking about
seeding,
if you're talking about the number 1 seed in the Mountain West tournament, that requires minimum 2 losses from New Mexico at this point, and the Aggies win out. So if you just want another trophy in the trophy case, one more New Mexico loss, they've got to go to San Diego State, they've got to go to Nevada. Those are their 2 toughest games because they have, I think, Air Force and UNLV at home are their other 2 games. So they have 2 tough games, and they have 2 relatively easy games. Although UNLV is just kind of weird because sometimes that's a really hard game and sometimes it's really easy. It's hard to tell. But that's kind of what shakes up. But the thing is, the Aggies also have a really difficult schedule. So that's what's going to make it really tough for the Aggies to have a chance here. Is like, sure, they need only a little bit of help, but they also need a lot of help themselves. They got to beat San Diego State, who's
right on their heels.
They're a very good team. I know they struggled a bit more on the road, and the Aggies were able to beat them in Viejas, but I don't know. When it comes to these Utah State, San Diego State games, I feel like you can't really count anything out. The Aztecs can be a very dangerous team. And then obviously, as we mentioned, Colorado State can be a very difficult team on the road. So, if Utah State, and that's, I didn't even mention Boise just then. And, Boise at home just beat New Mexico, handed them only their second loss all conference season. So at this point, obviously your ideal is that the Aggies win out, but your kind of minimum to be content with how the Aggies finish the season is to basically go 3-1. That's where I think Aggie fans would be content. If you lose one of these next 3 games against San Diego State, Boise State, and Colorado State, it's fine as long as it's just the one. But if you go 2-2, that's where you're starting to sweat things, because then seeding can get a little messy, because then suddenly you're probably tied with San Diego State or Colorado State. And you could end up going from the 2 seed down to 3 or 4 or something like that. So you got to try and go 3-1 here. You win 2 of those 3 tough games, and you assume you beat Air Force. I hope that's a safe assumption.
You'd hope.
But if you do that, your seeding's going to be fine. If you go 3-1, I'd be surprised if the Aggies are any worse than 2 or 3. I don't know if they could do worse than 3 if they go 3-1 in this last stretch of games. And then it also pretty much seals everything up for you to get into the NCAA tournament. The Aggies are getting to that point where they can be a lock, where there isn't really anything they could do in the conference tournament to knock them out of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the Aggies have a pretty good resume. 3-1 in quad 1 games, 6-3 in quad 2. They moved up to 34 in the net rankings with their win, because it likes offensive and defensive efficiency.
Oh, yeah, loves it.
Meanwhile, New Mexico dropped 4 spots. They went down to 41. Boise State, with their win over New Mexico, only moved up 1 from 47 to 46. But those are your teams out of the Mountain West San Diego State is still in the top 50. They're at 49. So there's 4 teams out of the Mountain West in the top 50. Utah State is first among them. But looking at their remaining schedules, as we've detailed, San Diego State and Logan on Saturday. Aggies then have 2 real big road games. The next Wednesday at Boise State, the following Saturday at Colorado State, before returning home and finishing against Air Force. The teams that are on the Aggies' heels, San Diego State, after they face the Aggies, they host New Mexico. Then they travel to Wyoming, they travel to UNLV, and they finish at home against Nevada. So they've got 5 games remaining. Aggies only have 4. Colorado State also has 5 games remaining. They have to travel to UNLV, travel to Air Force, they host the Aggies and the Spartans, and then they finish at Boise State. And then Boise State, also with 5 games left, travel to Nevada, host the Aggies, travel to Fresno and Air Force, and then finish at home against Colorado State. So it's each one of them have some challenging aspect of their final stretch here. But Utah State's may be the more difficult, because they still have to play 3 of the top 5 teams still remaining on the schedule.
Yeah, and you got to play 2 of those on the road. So this is, as I think I talked about this before, even the Colorado State game, where like if there was a point in the season where Utah State could collapse, have a lot of its season hopes start to die off a little bit because of their own doings, it would be this part of the schedule. Now, so far, with Colorado State and New Mexico, that was kind of the first 2 legs of what was a very difficult final 6 or 7 games of the season, they did pretty well. They go 2-1. They do lose to New Mexico, but it was close, so not devastating. You beat Colorado State fairly handily, but now this is the kind of second half of that difficult stretch where you have 3 straight against very tough opponents. And so this is really going to test Utah State's mettle once again. They've been tested before and come through all right. They had that, 3 in a row on the road with St. Mary's, San Diego State, and Nevada. Passed that with flying colors. And now they've got to do a very similar gauntlet here. 2 out of 3 on the road, 2 games against top 50 teams in the net, and then a Colorado State team who is 68 in the net, but heck, when they're at home, they play like they're a top 25 team.
Right. They're tough. Now, looking at bracket matrix, this was updated yesterday. There are only 3 teams being recognized, and those 3 are in the field. New Mexico has the highest as a 9 seed. Utah State is also listed as a 9 seed. Just Gonzaga wedged in between those 2. And then San Diego State is an 11 seed. Now, those 3 teams are in all the brackets that are being tabulated here, 103 brackets that are being looked at. There was a moment where Boise State was appearing on a bracket, but they no longer appear anywhere. And if I'm going to advocate for 4 teams out of the Mountain West, Boise State will need to win 4 of their last 5 games of the regular season. That one being that they don't win would be the Aggie game. Because I'm not going to advocate for them to beat the Aggies in Boise.
For the good of the conference, Eric.
But it's still looking like this is going to be a 3-team bid. 3 teams getting a bid to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's a 3-bid conference, barring one of... It'd probably be Boise State or Colorado State winning the conference tournament. Those are the only teams I feel like I could really see making that kind of run. Colorado State probably more so, but they'd also be away from home, which has not been good for them. So they might struggle to do that. But they do have one of the best players, so it's possible. But to be honest, Boise State would basically have to win out to even have anybody put them. If you're this late in the game, in the regular season, you got 5 games left, and you're not showing up on a single bracket. At that point, you got to be a bid stealer.
Right, you have to be a bid stealer. Yeah,
it's just too late at this point to be an at-large team if you were just not under any consideration at all, because the bracketologists are reaching a consensus at this point. And mind you, they're usually pretty darn close. Like most of them out of 68 teams, like at worst, they'll only get like 63 of the teams right. So these guys are pretty much on as far as who's in the tournament. Now, seeding, that's where a lot of the variation ends up happening. But the Mountain West seems pretty well locked in to 3 bids. There's some things that could happen, like if San Diego State just collapses down the stretch, maybe they fall off the bubble. That's certainly a possibility. It would take a lot for New Mexico or Utah State to fall off, but it's probably still technically possible if they lost out. But I wouldn't expect that from either the Lobos or the Aggies. So as things are in terms of trajectory, barring any jarring changes to that trajectory, Mountain West is looking at a 3-bid league, with a 4th if somebody steals a bid from those 3 teams.
Yeah, there's 4 teams that are in the top 50 of the net, but really only 3 teams have garnered enough attention with their season resumes to this point.
Because the net's not going to carry you into the NCAA tournament.
No, because Colorado State is, they're 68 in the net. They still got a ways to go. But Boise State, Colorado State, those teams would need to have a great run in the conference tournament to get the more recognition and consideration.
Yeah, and they'd honestly have to win it just because, again, there's just not enough time for them to make up that kind of ground without multiple high-level wins. And sure, Boise State could get a solid win over Utah State, but that wouldn't be enough to propel them. So when you're that late in the game, like, sure, Boise State has a good net and has decent metrics, but their resume, and whether or not you think this is right, I'm not really going to get into that argument because I'm not a bracketologist, and I'm just kind of observing the field here, observing what people who spend more time thinking about this than I do, what they think. They just aren't impressed by Boise State. And that's just the fact. And Colorado State, they're playing better than they were, but the bracketologists are also considering what happened earlier in the year. And so it's keeping Colorado State out, even though like if you took Colorado State only their second half of the season, they're probably a lot closer to a tournament team. But that's the folly of college basketball, is that the entire season really does matter. Because while there can certainly be recency bias, the metrics don't have recency bias. And the metrics form the foundation of who we think are in the tournament.
Any other thoughts on basketball before we shift to the football schedule release today?
I think that's mostly. I did want to point out one small thing, and I mentioned this on social media, but just the fact that Utah State scored 105 points in 66 possessions. Like every other time the Aggies have scored 100-plus points in a game this season, they've had more than 70 possessions. Mind you, they probably still would have done it against Westminster because they had 117 points and 73 possessions. But when I was looking up single-game offensive ratings for the Aggies, this game was the second highest offensive rating on record. This goes back to 2004. Second highest single-game offensive ranking that's out there. And it would probably be top 5 even if we had that data for the entire history of Utah State. This was a fantastic, it wasn't just a good, it was a fantastic offensive performance. And mind you, their offensive rating, according to Basketball Reference, like 153. The top one was like 157. That was the Westminster game from earlier. So the top 2 offensive ratings of the last 20 years have both been under Jared Calhoun. 4 of the top 15 have been under Jared Calhoun. So that's how good this team is offensively. But the 153 offensive rating the Aggies had, the next closest after that was like 146, which is a pretty dang big gap in terms of offensive defensive ratings. So it was one of the best, and it was one of the best by a wide margin. It's just another thing on top of this, where the Aggies are just showing how fantastic they can be.
By the way, just looking at the remaining schedule, Ken Palm predicting 2-2.
Yeah,
to finish out.
Yeah, they have
those 2 losses by combined 4 points.
Yeah, they have the Aggies winning by 1 point to Colorado State on the road, and then by 3.
Yeah, losing to Colorado State by 1, losing by 3 to Boise State.
Yeah, so of course they only have them winning by a couple to
by 4.
By 4 to San Diego. So 74-70, and then
and 23 against Air Force.
Yeah, that's like I said, they're expected to win, 98% chance to win. But yeah, these next 3 games are gonna be close ones. At least they should be. It's entirely possible for them to just be blowouts one way or the other. That happens in basketball, where 2 equally matched teams end up with a game that's decided by 10-plus points. But you hope that the Aggies are on the right side of that. Because, again, if you win 2 out of the next 3, that pretty much guarantees you're in the tournament. If you win all 3 of them, and that would assume you'd also win the 4th one, then you're locked in. You could not show up to the conference tournament and still make the NCAA.
Conference tournament isn't quite as important.
Yeah.
Because that would mean you have 2 more quad 1 games on your resume.
Yeah, you win 2 more quad 1 games, you seal it. You haven't added an in. Just as big as that is not adding any more losses. So you do yourself a ton of help. Don't lose any ground. And because Utah State's NCAA tournament fate, they can control that without even having to worry about the conference tournament, which is a luxury. They haven't often had that. Multiple of their runs into the NCAA tournament, like with the later Craig Smith teams and some of the Ryan Odom teams, those relied on good runs in the conference tournament.
Yes.
And they just about only got in because of those runs in the conference tournament. Here, they can seal that up before they even go. Kind of like last year. Last year, they were guaranteed to get in pretty much before they even went to the conference tournament. That's why they got an 8 seed. So, yeah, if you're the Aggies, you can take care of business. You can ensure you get into the tournament before March even really starts. If you win these next 2 games, you can go into March knowing you're going to be playing into late March, so long as you can win your next 2 games, or at least 2 out of the next 3.
All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk some football for a minute. The Mountain West Conference releasing its conference schedule today, and releasing its grid of games throughout the conference. in really the last year for all these teams together in the conference. But what that means is now Utah State knew its non-conference schedule. They knew who they were going to play and which games would be home versus what games would be away in conference. But now it's all laid out. So now we know what the Utah State football schedule looks like. It's still subject to change to some degree once television partners get involved. There could be a game that gets moved to a Friday night, or even I don't think Thursday is too much with the TV arrangement that the Aggies have now in the Mountain West. But there could be some slight adjustments to these dates. We certainly don't know any times yet, but we know when it starts, when it finishes, and when the bye weeks are for the Aggies. So I'll go through the schedule real quick, and then Jason, you give me your quick, just initial, like looking at this schedule, where games are going to be played, who is on the schedule, like what, just the quick initial reaction as to what the schedule record, the season record could look like for the Aggies. So they open it up at home against UTEP on August 30th. They travel to Texas A&M on Saturday, September 6th. They return home to be the first team to start conference play, hosting Air Force on the 13th. Then they host McNeese on the 20th. That's a lower division team. Then the Aggies will travel back into SEC country and to take on Vanderbilt on the 27th. Then they have a bye week. So they've a couple of Power 5 schools, or I guess P4 schools, a lower division school, and a conference game in there before they have their bye week on October 4th. Then they resume play on October 11th, traveling to Hawaii. So they've got that week to prepare to make that trip to Hawaii. Then they return home on the 18th to host San Jose. October 25th, they travel to New Mexico. Could be an emotional one. Coach Bronco Mendenhall, number of the players on Utah State, transferred from New Mexico. Could be an interesting in Albuquerque on October 25th. Then the Aggies have another bye week. They have 2 bye weeks this year. On November 8th, the season resumes in Logan against Nevada. Aggies then travel to UNLV on November 15th. They travel to Fresno State on November 22nd, and then finish the season in Logan on November 29th, hosting Boise State. So Aggies haven't seen Fresno in a little while. Some of these teams they haven't seen very often since this new scheduling format has been put together. But now that we know what the schedule looks like, Jason, what is that? Your quick reaction to what that schedule is and what the season record might be for Utah State?
Yeah, so I just went through, looked at all of them, wrote a little W or L next to them, like just kind of gut reaction. Noted a couple of coin flip games to give a bit of a range here, but I came up with 6-6. And I made a comment to you before we sat down and recorded, and I said they better get bowl eligible before November if they want to go to a bowl game.
It's going to be tough.
Because the end of the season could be a bit rough. So have them beating UTEP, McNeese, Hawaii, San Jose, New Mexico, and Nevada. Although the 2 coin flip games in there, Air Force and San Jose. I think those are 2 games that are like, those are the closest in terms of like, do I think it's more of a loss? Do I think it's more of a win? Air Force was really down last year, but I think they're going to take a step. They don't stay down for long when they do go down. And the Aggies have struggled at times against them. So, with it being at home, maybe I should have flipped that to a win, maybe San Jose to a loss. Of course, both those are at home, so that's going to be pretty big for those both being the 2 coin flip games. New Mexico may be a coin flip. I'm not 100% sold on New Mexico being able to continue their upward trajectory without Bronco. But I don't know if the Aggies are going to make this huge year 1 leap under Bronco, so I'm not sure they're going to be like really capable of winning those, a road game at New Mexico or whatnot. So that may or may not be a coin flip game. I'm still fairly sure that they'll be able to beat New Mexico because the Aggies just tend to beat New Mexico. Like last year was one of the biggest exceptions.
Yeah,
they just tend to have New Mexico's number. So yeah, I've got them at 6-6. So the range, depending on how you think they can do in some of these coin flip games, you could look at 4-8, kind of on the low end. I think they drew a nice conference schedule where Hawaii is a team they're able to beat a lot. San Jose, they have their big years, but if San Jose has a down year, then you should be able to win that one, especially because it's at home. If Air Force is still on a down trajectory, you can beat them, and you got them at home. And New Mexico, Nevada, they're a team that's been at the bottom for a while. I don't know if they're going to make a big jump. So you've got a lot of easier opponents, and it's front-ended. So you should be able to pack in some of those wins. Of course, then you've got 3 of the better teams of the last 4 or 5 years in the conference, and you got to face them back to back to back to end the season. UNLV, Fresno State, and Boise State. And I've got all 3 of those as losses. 2 of those on the road. Boise State is just the demon Utah State can't get away from as far as getting a win. Just can't pull it off. So, yeah, the Aggies are going to be around bowl eligibility once again, I think, either just below or just above that mark. And, based on the schedule and based on where I think this team is going to be year one of Bronco Mendenhall.
Yeah, I honestly had a really hard time giving a quick gut reaction score or record for Utah State because there's so many unknowns with the roster and with the coaching staff. When I initially looked at it, my first thought was, okay, looking through this, Aggies could go 7-5. And then I started thinking about it. Well, it's a new coaching staff. We don't know. Who's the quarterback going to be? What's the running back situation going to be like? A lot of new guys on offensive line. Defense is totally remade. I really don't know what this team is going to look like.
It's like there are games like you look at San Jose and New Mexico and Nevada and Hawaii. Like these are all games like for a while you just assume they're wins. They are. We win this game. You check that off. You say that is a game that Utah State is going to win. I can't do that with New Mexico or San Jose or Hawaii as much. I know I've got the Aggies winning. I think actually all 3 of those, but like I have to hesitate.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the big thing with this team is that it's such an unknown that despite the last few years, every time you see that team on the schedule, the Aggies have lost their most recent game to New Mexico. They've lost their most recent game to San Jose. They lost, I believe, their most recent game to Air Force, or at least several of their more recent games. They did win their most recent game against Hawaii, but like these are games that are a lot tougher because the Aggies have been on a bit of a downward trend. And until you see that upward trend once again, you can't be making those assumptions. So you can't just say, all right, these are all automatic wins. You can't say that all of UTEP and Air Force and Hawaii and San Jose and New Mexico and Nevada are all guaranteed wins. Because if that were the case, like the minimum would be 6 wins, and you'd just be counting how many games can they steal from Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, UNLV, Fresno, and Boise. Like that would be determining whether you're 6-6 at minimum and like 9-3 and maybe going to the conference championship game. We've got to see that upward trajectory before we can even consider having that kind of discussion.
There are 4 new head coaches in the conference. Bronco Mendenhall is one of those 4. The other 3 are on USU's schedule. Matt Entz at Fresno State, Jason Eck at New Mexico, Dan Mullen at UNLV. And just last thoughts on this, just looking at some of the notable non-conference games for the conference. Fresno State at Kansas. Let's see what you're about, Matt Entz, and go to Kansas and see what you can do in a week 0 game. Boise State is at South Florida on the 30th, August 30th. Fresno State's at Oregon State. So there's a couple of games here where future Pac-12 versus current Pac-12. Fresno State at Oregon State is one of those. San Diego State at Washington State on that same weekend. Cal is at San Diego State on September 20th. Washington State's at Colorado State on September 27th. And how about this one on October 4th? Boise State heading to Notre Dame. So it's Notre Dame coming off of a national title run. Boise State was also in the playoff last year. Do they make a case to get back? That's going to be a lot of attention on that game on October 4th.
Well, and for Boise State, this is going to be a very difficult season for them because the season after like an all-time run, because what Boise did last year, I don't know if it exceeds, but it comes dang near close to exceeding the BCS busting seasons they have. I could only really ask a Boise State fan to make that comparison, but certainly making it to like the college football playoff, you're in the club, you had a Heisman runner-up, like that's a freaking big deal. And they're going to have to follow that up without that Heisman runner-up, without several really good defenders, NFL caliber defenders that they're sending on. That's going to be really tough for them to overcome. Now, mind you, in those early 2000s, those BCS busting years, they were really good at rebounding from that because they kept, always being at the top of the conference. But it'll be interesting to see how close they come to last year. Are they just going to, they're going to be the preseason favorite. They're going to get picked to be number one in the conference because that's just what happens. The voters all pick Boise State.
Yeah.
And they're not wrong.
And there's some good reason for that.
There's good reason because they win it at minimum every third year.
Yeah.
So they're justified in picking them. I'm not criticizing because if you hand me a vote, I'd probably pick them too. I don't really see anybody else because Boise State's losing some guys, but pick anybody who's close to them. They also lost some guys, UNLV and whatnot. So.
Well, the thing to note also for Boise is a change at the offensive play caller.
Yeah.
Because that will be interesting to see how that may affect their team offensively in the future because they've had some change over there on that staff.
Yeah, and the thing with Boise State is they got used to ruling the roost in the WAC and then slowed down a bit in the Mountain West, where they stopped being a perennial like BCS and New Year's Six Bowl type contender, and they're not as dominant. And then they had a bit of a dip the last 3 years. Then this last year, stormed back to the top. They were as dominant as they've ever been. Is that a flash in the pan, or are they going to keep at that level? That's the thing to watch. Boise State had their dip. They had a couple of years where they struggled. Mind you, some of the years where they struggled and fired their coach, they were still a conference champion. So,
yeah,
it's true. don't get too mad, Boise State fans. You still have it pretty good. But are they going to go from that solid? Are they going to go back to being a solid G5 team, or are they going to go back to being top of the class G5, as they were this last year and as they have been for much of the 21st century?
Yeah, so full schedule for Utah State, you can find it at cachevalleydaily.com. So when the Aggies are home, when they're away, as mentioned, there could still be a few different tweaks to this when the TV partners get involved, especially when you consider that Thanksgiving weekend. There's been a lot of times that Aggie game gets moved to Friday instead of Saturday. But yeah, when TV partners get involved, some of those dates could be altered slightly, not dramatically, but slightly. And certainly we don't know the kick times on these.
Yeah, we don't have any of the kick times really, as far as I'm aware. And yeah, we could see a couple move to Friday. That's basically it. Have they even played a Thursday game in a minute?
Since they're not on ESPN, they haven't done a Thursday night game in a long time.
Fox or CBS even really do Thursday?
I don't think so. I think ESPN's the only one that does that.
Which, since they don't play BYU, you do play two SEC teams, so maybe.
Yeah, but if it's in their house, they're going to want to play it on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, you're probably going to be isolated to Friday and Saturday, which is the way I prefer. I don't like Thursday college football games. It doesn't feel right.
But that's a little interesting to go take on two P4 schools in the same season that aren't part of this Pac-12 scheduling arrangement. So they
did it last year.
It's a pretty hefty check coming to the Utah State Aggies.
Yeah, they did it last year. I don't know how much they got paid since they got to host Utah. I don't know if they would have gotten much, if at all, from that scheduling arrangement.
They wouldn't have gotten anything from Utah.
Yeah. So, but
other than your own ticket sales.
Yeah,
jacking up the price and taking away student seats.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, you'll probably get two 7-figure checks from the Aggies and the Commodores. I'd forgotten that Vanderbilt was called the Commodores. Hadn't thought of their nickname in years. It's just Vanderbilt.
Just Vanderbilt. Yeah. Vandy. Well, yeah, so more details on that on cachevalleydaily.com. And then we'll be back at it again on Friday with a live show.
Yeah, we'll be back live on air. Had those issues yesterday, but we were live on air yesterday.
Yeah.
But we'll be back. We'll maybe go into a bit more detail. I'll have some more numbers and thoughts on the schedule.
We'll have more details and updates on what's going on with the high school playoffs as well.
Yeah, we'll have the kind of the quarterfinal summary as all the games are going on today. and then preview Utah State and San Diego State. Big game. We'll talk to Coach tomorrow. He'll have his media availability probably somewhere around 2 o'clock tomorrow. That's when it usually is. It's about when their practice is. So we'll have a chance to talk with him, with Coach, maybe one of the players, and preview another big game. The start of we droned on and on about how big these next 3 games are. The first of those 3, we'll have a chance to talk to Coach Calhoun about. So we'll have that tomorrow.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of Full Court Press and listening to the pod with our reactions after a big win.
By the way,
Utah
if
State men's
you're
basketball
listening
team.
before like 5 or 6 o'clock on Thursday, go to Raising Cane's. They're having a bit of a fundraiser for the herd.
There you go. All right. Thanks for tuning in, being part of the Full Court Press. Listen to the pod here on 106.9 FM, thefan.com. Should be 1069thefan.com. That's the website.
There you go. 1069thefan.com or the 1069 The Fan mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts.